And on day 26 of the Ukraine war, with existing sanctions not seeming to slow down Putin's war, the US President Joe Biden is set to visit Poland this Friday to discuss the Ukraine humanitarian crisis after he meets with NATO and EU leaders to try and impose further sanctions on Russia.
Russia of bombing a Mariupol art school that was being used as a shelter home for close to 400 people. The city is seeing intense fighting, with Ukraine rejecting a Kremlin ultimatum to surrender Mariupol this morning.
У блокадному Маріуполі російська авіація скинула бомбу на школу мистецтв. Там ховалися люди. Ховалися від обстрілів, від бомбардування. Там не було військових позицій. Там було близько 400 мирних людей. У більшості своїй жінки і діти. Люди старшого віку. Вони під завалом.
Putin's spokesperson has ruled out both talks with Zelensky as well as a ceasefire.
Нет, дело в том, что остановка операции, любая остановка, она используется вот этими самими логистическими подразделениями для перегруппировки, используется для того, чтобы продолжать атаки на российских военных.
Russia also continued its attacks by air and land on the capital city of Kyiv. A shopping mall close to Kyiv's center was bombed. Several died in the bombing, say officials. However, Moscow confirmed the killing of one of its senior military officials, Andrei Pally, the deputy commander of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Russia released an unverified video which claims to show an attack on a Ukrainian reconnaissance battalion west of the capital. With existing sanctions not seeming to slow down Putin's war, US President Biden is set to visit Poland this Friday to discuss the Ukraine humanitarian crisis after he meets with NATO and European Union leaders for imposing further sanctions on Russia. Priyanshi Sharma for NDTV.
Meanwhile, as the situation in Mariupol continues to remain grim, we're now learning that Russia has issued an ultimatum stating that it will release civilians in Mariupol only if Ukraine surrenders the city. Ukraine had earlier said that there would be no question of that happening. Meanwhile, back home, India's economy is far better placed today and there'll be a marginal impact from the Ukraine war, has said the RBI Governor.
Clearly foresee that the inflation will moderate, and it did moderate. Because you see, the point is, if you start compressing, if you start initiating a premature demand compression through monetary policy action, then it would be counterproductive. There can be some spillovers, but whatever are the spillovers, I can say with reasonable amount of confidence that we will be able to maintain the stability of the Indian rupee. In fact, our interventions in the foreign exchange market, if you see, it is the standard policy. Our standard policy is that we intervene to prevent excessive volatility.
This on a day when the Indian equity benchmarks plunged, halting a sharp two-day rally as the continued conflict in Ukraine pushed oil prices higher. The 30-share BSE Sensex slipped 571 points to close at 57,292, while the broader NSE Nifty moved 169 points lower to settle at 17,118. Both the indices had rallied more than 3.50% each in the previous two sessions. And in the backdrop of the Ukraine crisis, India and Australia held a virtual summit. Prime Minister Modi met virtually with his Australian counterpart. And while Australia called Ukraine's invasion unlawful, there was no mention of the Ukraine war in Prime Minister Modi's speech.
As the crisis in Europe deepens over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, another Quad member holds meetings with Prime Minister Modi. Just days after the Japanese PM was here, now it was Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He and Mr. Modi met virtually today. In a repeat of what happened during the Japan visit, Mr. Morrison used strong words to describe Russia's actions, calling it an unlawful invasion of Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi did not make any reference to the war in his opening comments.
Quad leaders call recently, which gave us the opportunity to discuss Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine, but it also gave us the opportunity to discuss the implications and consequences of that terrible event for our own region in the Indo-Pacific and the coercion and the issues that we face here.
हमारा यह सहयोग फ्री, ओपन और इंक्लूसिव इंडो पैसिफिक के प्रति हमारी प्रतिबद्धता को दर्शाता है। क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक स्थिरता के लिए क्वाड की सफलता बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है।
Today's summit meeting comes days after a top Chinese official aggressively compared the Quad to NATO's expansion in Europe, calling it dangerous. PM Modi brought up the issue of China's transgressions in Ladakh.
Prime Minister did refer to the line of actual control in Ladakh, the incidents of the previous year, and he emphasized that peace and tranquility in the border areas was an essential prerequisite for normalization of relations with China. Obviously, the Ukraine issue was discussed, as was the issue of China. On Ukraine, I think it was clear that the two sides had referred to the Quad summit, in which the leaders had a fairly clear perspective that the situation in Ukraine should not impact on the Indo-Pacific.
With the Ukraine war dragging on, there is plenty of diplomatic activity in New Delhi at the moment. After Australia and Japan, a senior US official is also here, and the Israeli Prime Minister will come in April. Bureau Report, NDTV.
And it was an emotional farewell for the Indian student Naveen, who was killed in Ukraine in Russian shelling. His body was finally flown back home to Karnataka 3 weeks after his death. And after the puja, the body was donated by his family for medical research.
Emotions reigned high through the streets of Chalgare village. Scores of people from here and neighbouring areas came for the final farewell of Naveen Shekharappa, the fourth-year student killed in the shelling in Kharkiv on March 1st.
He was very ambitious about his medical education. Now we handed over a body to the SS Medical College Davangere, so which will be helpful for us. We tried generally in a government seat all over Karnataka and India, but due to some reason he is unable to get the seat.
Simple nature, friendly nature. We are playing gully cricket.
After a procession, Naveen's parents handed over his remains to doctors in Chalgare, from where the body was transported to SS Medical College in Davangere district, about 35 kilometers from Naveen's hometown. It's taken almost 20 days for Naveen's body to be brought home because of the intense fighting in Ukraine. His remains were brought early this morning at the Bengaluru International Airport. Of the 19,000 Indian students who returned from the war-torn Ukraine, 572 students are from Karnataka, and around 62 students had returned to the state before the start of Operation Ganga. Speaking about Indian students leaving the state for pursuing MBBS in Ukraine, Chief Minister Baswaraj Bommai said that the government will be reducing the cost very soon.
We have to sit up and look into the cost of medical education, which is going very high. And as far as Karnataka is concerned, I have made already a meeting of all our concerned officers of the medical education minister and health and our finance, everybody. And we have decided now to categorize our colleges, especially in Karnataka, ABC, and see that the rates, the fees are come down as per the facilities.
Through the journey, the hearse van carrying the mortal remains of Naveen was showered with petals. In fact, there is a closure to especially the endless wait for his body. All that the Naveen's parents ask for is to ensure that all the students who aspire to become doctors, in fact, a medical seat at an affordable price. In Chalagari, with camera person Govind Murthy, Shrija for NDTV.
And former cricketer Harbhajan Singh and IIT professor Sandeep Pathak, the educationist Ashok Kumar Mittal and the Delhi MLA Raghav Chadha are the Aam Aadmi Party's nominees for the Rajya Sabha or the upper house of Parliament from Punjab. Pushkar Dhami, who lost his election, is to be Uttarakhand's Chief Minister again. Mr. Dhami has been given a second term as the Chief Minister of the state. Even though he lost his own seat, Khatima, the decision is being seen as recognition for the 46-year-old who had spearheaded the BJP's campaign that led the party to a record second straight term.
Firstly, there was suspense for so many days because the party initially was a bit hesitant to go ahead with a leader as the chief minister, in whom the public had not expressed its trust because he lost from the Khatima constituency, from where he had, however, won for the last two terms. Now, looking at the reasons that worked in Mr. Dhami's favour, one was the fact that he had been the chief minister for only 7 months so far, and the BJP wanted to give him a chance, enough time to prove himself, and also to have a stable government in Uttarakhand. Last year in July, when Mr. Dhami was chosen as the Chief Minister, just before him, two Chief Ministers, Mr. Trivendra Singh Rawat and Mr. Tirath Singh Rawat, had been changed in quick succession. So the BJP did not want to come across as a party that is indecisive, that does not have faith in its own leaders, and in order to maintain stability in the government, it wanted to continue Mr. Dhami's tenure. One other factor that worked very strongly in Mr. Dhami's favour was the fact that a lot of local MLAs here were supporting Mr. Dhami. If the BJP had gone ahead with a new name and all the local MLAs did not support this new chief minister, then the government would have found it very tough to function, because across the hierarchy there has to be support for the leader that is heading them. So all of these factors really worked in favour of Mr. Dhami, and now all eyes on his swearing-in ceremony that is set to take place on 23rd of March at the parade ground, which has a seating capacity of over 20,000 people, and even senior leaders of the BJP are expected there.
And Pramod Sawant was unanimously elected the leader of the BJP's legislative party in Goa, paving the way for him to take over as a chief minister for a second term too. So, in the end, the BJP has actually repeated all of its 4 chief ministers in the 4 states that it won in these recent elections.
So yes, there are no surprises, but is this a Modi gamble? Well, the BJP has repeated all 4 chief ministers in the states that it won. But despite losing, let's take a look at this one by one. Despite losing his seat, Pushkar Singh Dhami has been cleared for the position of Uttarakhand Chief Minister. This could in fact be seen as an attempt to contain the factional divide in the BJP's Uttarakhand unit. Dhami will now have to win the by-polls in about 6 months from now. Let's shift to Goa, where Pramod Sawant, again no surprise, was the existing Chief Minister, has been declared the Chief Minister again. This decision taken even as Vishwajit Rane's name emerged as one of the front-runners. There are support of independents which have ensured that the BJP goes ahead with its choice of Pramod Sawant. Now, both these names were cleared in a meeting at the Prime Minister's residence last night. But all eyes will be on the very crucial Uttar Pradesh, where while the Chief Minister has not been changed and the elections were fought in the leadership of Yogi Adityanath, but despite losing, will Keshav Prasad Maurya, a man who was seen very close to Modi and Shah, be made the Deputy Chief Minister? Maurya was seen in a meeting with Prime Minister ahead of the UP elections. All governments have seen a very clear Modi-Shah influence, but is UP going to be different? And that is the most contentious bit. What decision is going to be taken as far as Yogi's cabinet is concerned, which has seen certain sparks between the centre as well as the state? Is UP going to see a Yogi government or a Modi government?
And Swami Sivananda, the yoga guru from Kashi, received his Padma Shri award from President Ramnath Kovind for his contribution to the field of yoga. The Padma Award is, of course, one of the highest civilian awards in India. And finally, the incredible video that's gone viral of Pradeep Mehra running a 10-kilometer sprint after midnight, after working a days-long shift at McDonald's. He works by day and he runs at night in the hope that he can be fit to one day join the Indian Army.
यार सुनो, तुम सुबह दौड़ लेना, मैं तुम्हें छोड़ देता हूँ।
सुबह ना उठ के बाद आना, सुबह मुझे ड्यूटी को जल्दी जाना होता है, खाना वाना बनाना होता है।
तो कितना किलोमीटर दौड़ लेता है?
10 किलोमीटर है, 16 से बरोला।
तो दौड़ते हुए क्यों जा रहे हो? दौड़ते हुए क्यों जा रहे हो?
दौड़ के जाता हूँ।
तो गाड़ी में छोड़ देता हूँ ना? गाड़ी में छोड़ देता हूँ।
ऐसे जाऊँगा ना, दौड़ने का टाइम ही अभी मिलता है मुझे।
तो दौड़ क्यों रहे हो अभी?
आर्मी के लिए।
आर्मी के लिए?
हाँ।
बाप रे, क्या नाम है तुम्हारा बेटा?
प्रतीक मेहरा।
यार सुनो, तुम सुबह दौड़ लेना, मैं तुम्हें छोड़ देता हूँ।
सुबह में उठ के बाद आना, सुबह में ड्यूटी को जल्दी जाना होता है, खाना वाना बनाना होता है।
कितने बजे?
8 बजे।
ईजा बाजू कहाँ चल?
घर मम्मी इलाज चल मो।
ओहो।
हाँ, मेरे गांव में से बहुत लोगों का, बहुत दोस्तों का फोन आ रहा है, भाई तूने तो आग लगा दी, ये कर दी, वो कर दी।
आर्मी से भी कई लोगों ने फोन किया, तो सब लोग तुमसे बात करना चाहते हैं।
मैं उम्मीद करूंगा कि आप फौज में आ सको। हमने किसी से बात की है, कोई आपसे संपर्क करेगा और कोशिश करेंगे, आपको ट्रेनिंग दिलाएंगे।
May all his dreams come true. That's the news at the hour. Bye-bye.